Hello, my name is Brittany Hoover, and I am a graduate student at Morningside College, and I'm a 3rd through 5th grade special education teacher at North Union. And this is my 3rd year, going on my 4th year, and North Union is located in north central Iowa. My research is based on the influence of virtual learning environment in K-12 students' academic performance. The education issue is that students in K-12 education were experiencing and are experiencing more virtual learning than ever due to the 2020 pandemic. The most traditional brick and mortar, where students physically learn face-to-face, has become less ideal for learning due to the environment being unsafe for students and staff. With the health and safety of our students and staff coming first, students have been required to learn virtually. So this research used ex post facto data from FastBridge Reading Assessment to identify and determine if students' academic performance in 2020 was statistically different from previous years. I chose this topic because when I began my research, the school I was teaching in, or am teaching in, was being impacted by the pandemic, and all learning was being virtual. I was concerned on students' academic performance when virtual learning was taking place as the new environment. We had never taught, nor had the students used, a virtual format to learn away from teachers in the classroom. With less engagement, minimal opportunities for instant feedback and social skills, I was definitely concerned how this would impact the longevity of our students' academic progress and growth. So, it was hypothesized that there would be a statistical difference between the 5th grade students in the fall of 2020 who received virtual learning, scoring lower in reading fluency compared to those students in the fall of 2019 and 2018 who had not received any virtual learning. Recent studies are finding out that full-time online learning is not delivering the academic results that brick and mortar would be giving students. There are predictions being made that students will be less skilled and less productive compared to those students from previous generations who had not experienced a gap of learning and education. Researchers are finding out that students who moved from brick to mortar and virtual learning are experiencing large negative effects in the academic areas of mathematics, English, and/or language arts. Vygotsky addressed that instructor plays a key role in constructing students' knowledge effectively while learning online. He believes that instructors need to provide immediate and consistent feedback, and as us teachers know, we know how important that is. He also believes that creating a sense of engagement and motivating group collaboration to learn successfully. So that is very important, and he values that, and I think most of us teachers see that as well. A study was done with a mixed method using both quantitative and qualitative data, and found that students who are enrolled in traditional and brick and mortar class generally receive slightly higher grades and assignment scores than those who had participated online virtually. However, over the past decade, the need for virtual learning was becoming evident as schools were looking for various ways to meet students' needs. Since the pandemic that affected most, if not all, the schools, in March of 2020, virtual learning from home and had become more prominent in education settings more than ever. Live found that students were absorbing 25 to 60% more material when learning online compared to only 8 to 10% in classroom, because students can learn quicker in an online format. He also said that the evidence shows that virtual learning requires 40 to 60% less time to learn than in a brick and mortar setting, based on individual learning pace, having the ability to reread, skipping, or accelerating through concepts as students prefer. So they're doing what's at their pace and what they can do most efficiently and effectively. Farros found that adding synchronous, which is learning at the same time, he had said that he found that adding synchronous discussions in an asynchronous format, which means learning at different times, may potentially improve learning outcomes. So students who are participating in synchronous format seem to perform better in the course than those students in the asynchronous delivery. He also found that students' success was measured by grades, and they were higher when synchronous learning was applied. So he was saying that the student's success measured by grades was higher when synchronous learning was applied. I'm going to clarify that there. The research question that really led this study was what impact did virtual learning in spring 2020 have on fifth grade reading fluency in a small North Central elementary school as measured by the FastBridge reading assessment? The purpose of the casual comparative study, while using ex post facto data, was to analyze if there was an impact on the fifth grade students' reading fluency scores in the fall of 2020 due to virtual learning being implemented in the spring of 2020. The research may impact the field of the study by increasing data collection where there is a lack of data, especially with it being a recent and current pandemic. This research would impact my work by identifying if virtual learning has a significance on students' academic performance. So for the casual comparative study, I used those ex post facto data, like I had mentioned, from FastBridge reading assessment that is done 3 times a year in our school, the fall, the winter, and the spring. I collected only data from the fall assessment due to the virtual learning taking place in the spring of 2020. The students began school in a brick and mortar learning environment, and at the end of August, and we assessed in the fall at the end of September. So they had about only 1 month of, probably less than 30 days to be honest, of actual brick and mortar learning before we assessed. This design was chosen and most appropriate because our school had already gone back to a brick and mortar learning environment in the fall of 2020. Therefore, our students were no longer learning virtually. To get a true sense of data that was impacted by virtual learning in the spring, I needed to use and compare that data that had already been collected, so that the most logical way to compare any data that was impacted by that pandemic was to collect the fall assessments, which would have been the first assessment that these students would have used since the pandemic. The participants for this study were fifth graders at a small rural North Central Iowa community school. The average age of the students was 10 years old. The number of participants included 29 students from the fall of 2008, 31 students from the fall of 2019, and 21 students from the fall of 2020. The materials used was the 2018 through 2020 fall FastBridge reading assessment curriculum-based screening scores for reading fluency only, and JAS software for data collections that I was doing and that I will talk about here soon. Each student read a fifth grade level reading passage provided by FastBridge. The reading assessment was given by the general education teacher, measured words correct per minute, and the score of each student's reading fluency was reported by the teacher. The researcher compared the years 2020 and 2019, 2020 and 2018, and 2018 and 2019 using independent samples t-test to see if there was a statistical difference among the years of fifth grade students' reading fluency scores. I used 3 independent sample t-tests using the JAS software to compare both groups' curriculum-based measurement scores from the FastBridge reading assessment in the fall. So as you can see here, here's my data analysis, and you can see that the 2019-2020 I broke it down so you guys can see that. For each comparison, each p-value was greater than 5%. Since the p-value was greater than 5%, there was no statistically significant difference. The data indicated that there was strong evidence of the null hypothesis. The researcher failed to reject the null hypothesis due to the alternative hypothesis being weak. The alternative hypothesis identified there was a significance since the p-value was greater than 5%. The independent samples t-test analysis of the results provided evidence to support the alternative hypothesis. Looking at Table 1, there was no statistical difference between the years other than the mean and standard deviation, which was considered to be normal variability. The 2019 group of fifth grade students, on average, scored higher than the 2020 group of fifth grade students. Also, the t-test for the CBM fall scores for 2018 and 2019, or 2018 and 2020, show that there was no statistical difference. The 2018 group of fifth grade students on average scored lower than the 2020 group of fifth grade students, and you can see that there. Here is figure one, our bar graphing displaying the standard deviation based on the curriculum-based measurement scores. So the standard deviation for 2019 was 35, while the year 2018 and 2020 were both closer to each other with a standard deviation of 27 and 28.5. There was more variability in the 2019 scores than the 2020 scores, as you can see. There was no statistical evidence to suggest that scores from the fall of 2020 were lower than the scores in the years of 2018 and 2019. Therefore, the results provided evidence to support the alternative hypothesis. I learned that students in my school, specifically fifth graders, reading fluency was not significantly impacted by virtual learning taking place in the spring. I realized that the scores from 2020 were much more comparable to the year 2018, and I still am uncertain of why they are so compared. Even though there was minimal research to support virtual learning in the pandemic of 2020, this study done by Lai, it interested me that the most with its current data being done in 2020 during the pandemic was in mentioning that students absorb more materials online than in a traditional learning setting. So that was very interesting to me because that was something I learned during my research that kind of surprised me and kind of was like, oh, because I honestly went into like thinking like this fear of students learning virtually. Also, I want to include that the primary implication of this study for participants is that whether learning is virtually or brick or mortar, there is not a statistical or major impact that affects academic performance. So like I had mentioned, students are absorbing 25 to 60% more material when learning online, and compared to only 8 to 10% in classroom, which was like, wow. Virtual learning requires 40 to 60% less time to learn than in a brick and mortar setting. So something that just was a huge wow factor. Needless to say, even though the study did not support that there was statistical or major impact on reading fluency when learning virtually, does not mean that the virtual learning does not impact academic performance. There is further studies and data that needs to be done to identify a clearer picture of the educational issue. Limitations. So the sample size is one class per year ranging from 21 to 31 students. They were only fifth grade students. Only 2 years were compared to the current year of 2020. Fast-read reading assessment was only used for data comparison for reading fluency. Other areas of reading should be compared and analyzed. Only one subject reading was analyzed. Each year, data was recorded by different teachers through the use of FastBridge, and students received different instruction and delivery methods of learning, so different teachers and reading interventions for support. Recommendations. I continue to research to strengthen and validate the findings of this study because there's such a lack of data that I think there would be a lot more now. Compare other grades and age levels, identify students' demographics to compare the significance in certain areas, use more than just 3 years, maybe 5+ years of previous data from collected reading assessments and compare various reading assessment data, utilize additional reading assessments other than or in addition to FastBridge reading assessment, keep data records consistently, like throughout the study with the same recorder, identify delivery instruction given to students and compare among those, so talking about that asynchronous and synchronous if there is a difference. Analyze the additional reading skills like comprehension. So there's so many other things that you could take this and support, whether or not it really is impacting students. This is a very small chunk that I did my study on. Analyze other subjects and assessments related to subjects. So just like I said, making sure that we can look at the other areas, like especially reading and math, are those strong cores that we could really focus on, what areas, what specifics. The study could be, this could go forever, and I think that's exciting about this. And then here's my references that I used for my study, a lot more, but these were references that I had pointed out during this presentation. And that is all I have for you. Hopefully you were able to gain some knowledge and found this very interesting. I find it interesting, and I look forward to what's to come for virtual learning for our students. Thank you.